Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for all joining. I know there's some folks who will be rolling in here in a few minutes. We'll get started, and I just want to welcome you all. Hopefully it's been a good morning rolling into the afternoon after lunch. Thank you for taking the time to join myself. I'm going to do some quick intros here, and then we're going to have a good conversation through service management. Continue on and actually just building upon the conversation from this morning about high-velocity service management. My name is Paul Buffington. I currently manage the North American Solution Engineering team. We get a chance to work with customers on a weekly basis, probably one of my most favorite things in what we do, because we learn from the innovation and just fantastic different ways that our customers are using products around Jira Service Management. I'm also now starting to focus on the overall customer journey and the strategies we need in place to make sure that you're successful. So I want to turn to my colleagues here. I love working with the Adaptives team. They're a global platinum partner. Worked with them for many, mmany years in my 8 years at Atlassian. So I'll hand off to Richard here and let you go ahead and get us started.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Paul. So my name is Richard Crampton. My role at Adaptavist is a senior solution success advocate. And what that actually means is I have the joy of talking to customers, understanding their problems, and understanding how we as a partner, using the Atlassian tools, can really help to address some of these concerns. I'll pass to my colleague, Phil.
Yeah, Phil Fox, I work for the Adaptavist Group too. I'm Principal Customer Success Advocate, so my job is helping enterprises primarily get the solutions and the success that they need, and that's what I do. I talk to customers and help them get through their problems.
So just a quick mention here of a slide we've probably seen in some other presentations that we're going to be talking about quite a bit here that may represent some of the things we're going in the future. But we're excited to share what we're going to be going through, so just want to get this in place to get started. And so let's start big picture. Innovation. Now, if I were to ask you what drives innovation in your organization, we can point to probably different types of products and services, things that are critical to the business, things that are critical to internal operations. Or you might point to software teams get a lot of the credit, and they should. They work really hard in writing and building the code. But there's other parts of innovation I think are very, very important. It's become very obvious to Atlassian. One thing I love about being inside of Atlassian, we're about teams and learning from teams. And one of the things that research shows that innovation is driven by the individuals in an organization. And this goes back to, if you go back 50 years ago, you may be familiar with David Drucker. He's done research in this area back then that points to now is just coming about, and that is he identified the future of work was the knowledge worker. Nowhere is that more prevalent in what we see coming out of the pandemic and new ways of working, the way that we interact with our colleagues in the business that are driving different initiatives, our day-to-day work that ultimately impact our customer. But if you look forward of that, the knowledge worker that David Drucker identified is now really the learning worker. We are dependent, we're in the information age, and when I go to, you're doing your day-to-day tasks, you're working on something and supporting something, you need information to make decisions, to adapt quickly, and there's that flow of work. It's not done in isolation. So we're going to talk a lot about a learning organization, the knowledge worker, that fits very squarely inside of a service management solution that you might be designing and rolling out in your organization. Before I do that, I want to look at really it's in the bigger context of digital transformation. Now, it is a buzzword in some areas, it's used a lot, but what I love inside of Atlassian is we get to see on a daily basis, digital transformation is driven by software teams, but it's not just software teams. And so we commissioned around cloud, because cloud plays such a prominent role in that and how cloud has transformed the way we build and deliver capabilities. Forrester came in and did a research study with Atlassian. They found that yes, it's important to businesses, 78% of them. 74% of those businesses are looking at changing and adapting the way they work. They said processes, and I always think, well, process is governance and flow of work. Practice is organizationally how we're going to do that. And then finally, the last one on this that really resonates with you is new capability, new products, new services. How do we do that to maintain market position and also deliver value to our customers or even our internal stakeholders? Now, further into the study, we found, Phil.
But what we shouldn't forget is there are external drivers that really do drive change, and the pandemic was something that really shook up so many organizations who, we can't change this, we can't change that, there's no way we can do that in less than 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, who all of a sudden had to change their way of working from primarily office-based to remote working, and they did it. And many organisations have actually looked back and taken that as a success, learned from that, and that's now impacting the way in which they're thinking for the future. So I think it is important. All those things you talked, absolutely. But just that shake-up of ways of working has made a big difference to a lot of customers as well.
It's a good point. You've seen that front line just working with customers and being, in their offices and work or remote now, as we've done a lot of remote consulting. And I think the next level of detail in the study confirmed that where are you at as an organization, not only just for software teams, but different parts of the service organization. There is a high level, they're centralized. And what, as you've mentioned, is forcing that. How do we move towards federated or even decentralized models? We see as the lower level, the details in the study, collaboration and connection of teams is something that's really, really key in a digital transformation strategy. So teamwork is vital. It's vital in driving in, that organization, what they're doing. Our mission is to unleash potential in every team. But we also know that teamwork is very, very hard in complex organizations. So what we want to do is take service teams, we believe that they are vital and critical to the overall mission of our organization, and how do we connect them in a way that's going to not only improve the way they work in collaboration, but drive that delivery of capability, that value. And so what I want to talk about first before we get there, because as I said, it's not easy, it's challenging. And we have a lot of challenges on here. As we were collaborating on this and they were sharing some of the projects they've encountered. You see many of them on here, lengthy delays and such. But I want to, Richard, you think back to last year, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen for teams, especially service teams?
I think a lot of it is in terms of the feedback they're getting. So, for example, they have 25 missed SLAs last week. But what does that actually equate to? That's customers going, you're not meeting our expectations. You're not delivering on what has been promised. And therefore, the faith in that team is eroding. And what does that mean for the overall customer experience? And it's the same with the expectations as well. So what is good enough today won't be good enough tomorrow. More and more customers are used to having services both in their personal and professional lives, and they're used to 24/7 support. Their expectation, if one company can do that, why can't my company provide me that? Or why can't my supplier provide me that? So it's meeting those expectations. And if we don't, that erodes the confidence of the teams.
Yeah, and that's a good point in identifying challenges like that, especially the silos that we'll create in the teams and the SLAs around that. So good point.
Yeah, I think you've also got to remember that teams don't work in isolation.
That's true.
They're going to be working in a compliance or a regulated industry where they have to conform. And as we saw this morning, some of the things around automation, if you don't get your automation right, it'll cost you time. If you don't put any automation in, you'll not be saving the time. So it's really important that you think about how do you connect with the outside world, what are the drivers from outside that are impacting you, and how does that experience translate into your customers, the people who are using your service, as being satisfied or ideally happy.
Great point. And I think understanding these challenges as we work with teams are just really key to that we can start to chart how we would help them and connect that flow of work. And I think we take inspiration. We're all very passionate about it. I come from an ITSM consulting background. Beyond IT, there's so many teams to help. We need inspiration, and that's where Forrester, I think, comes in. The Forrester, they've launched into what they call enterprise service management. And to us, it's service management and just connecting all of that. But I think they have some really good guidance in that. They're looking at these knowledge workers, the learning organization, performing that work, and how do we actually have better outcomes that start to connect that work? We're going to talk about some ways of doing that in just a minute, but I think it's really key in this. Forrester, when they looked at this, if you look at the ESM study, they say there's an idea coming in from the business. There's developments, or I'm going to go out and get an external vendor to build this. We're going to build it, put it together, and we're going to offer this as a product or service. How do I activate that? And across that critical flow of work in that organization, they're asking questions of who's involved, what's the governance, all that. So we're taking a lot of really just good ideas and insights from what Forrester's found in their research. And we're going to go ahead and unify this idea of work of service across teams. It might start for just a couple of teams, or it may be a bigger project. And we're going to talk about some really good examples that these guys have worked with. But first, I want to talk about frameworks. There's a governance model, there's an operating model of day-to-day, and there's frameworks. Frameworks are good.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah, there are. And we'll talk about what are some of the key aspects from frameworks that you always, when you're working with a customer, that you focus on?
I think the overriding thing, a framework is only that. A framework is not a set of rules that you abide by. A framework gives you a place to start from, a place that gives you, all of you out there, the opportunity to develop and implement your own solution that is perfectly tailored to your organisation, your organisation's requirements. When I hear people talk about, oh, we've took a framework off the shelf and we've implemented it and that's worked. No, what you've done is you've tried to enforce somebody else's concepts of the ways of working. That's not likely to resonate with your employees and your people. You need to take that framework, understand the benefits, understand what it does, where does it support your business, but more importantly, where do you need to meld it and alter it to make it support your business?
That's a great point. I hear agility coming through.
Oh,
what
absolutely.
you're saying.
Agility, absolutely.
Yeah.
Take the framework, trial it. Don't be scared of failing. That's something which I think traditionally, and I've been in the IT industry for more years than I care to remember, there was a concept of failure is bad. Yeah. If your solution fails in whatever way, even small things, that was really bad. Actually, nowadays, allow things to fail, but make sure that you have the ability to adjust and adapt and move forward from that point, learning on those failures and moving forward. And it's really positive to see that being adapted and adopted, both adapt and adopt that agility in the marketplace, not just in service management, but across whole industries.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Richard.
I was going to say pretty much the same. I think all of these frameworks provide really good guidance, but it's guidance. You need to take that guidance, understand what's being said, and how does that apply to my business? How does it apply to 9 needs? Where do I take this good practice and apply it across the different elements to drive business results?
Yeah. And there are many frameworks, as you mentioned here, and many of those aspects are, I think, important of process, practice, service. If we look across there, of all of these frameworks, and you encounter many of them, and we didn't even list all of them. We talked about some of the others, but we probably would find, what's the unifying aspect in this?
It's the value chain.
Yeah. Yeah, value streams, I think, are really critical of how we connect work, not doing it in isolation. Now, before we get to value streams, I know we've just come out of lunch, but I'm thinking about tonight for dinner.
Absolutely.
I was thinking about, ITIL 4. We're going to talk about, I will focus in on ITIL 4 because I think there's a lot of value that it gives us and informs us. But let's talk about a pizza restaurant. Could we adopt ITIL 4 to pizza restaurant?
Absolutely. I'm going to talk here about an example. I'm going to introduce a little pizza company. They're based in Suffolk, where I live. It's a company called Pizza Rosso. They're not going to be out there. They're not going to be supporting all you folks. You're not going to be able to go out and order it locally. But more importantly, what they have is they have a demand. I live in the rural part of Suffolk. There's 3,500 residents, roughly, in the village and around the village where I live. You can imagine that's not going to appeal to a large pizza operation. They don't have that many. So what did he do? He took a horse box, he converted it into a pizza place, and he parks it in the pub car park. He sells pizzas from a horse box. Great. He uses Facebook as his primary source of advertising and marketing, so he keeps his costs down. But demand, he measures his demand. He works out how many pizzas can he make in an evening, how many bases, how many toppings. That's his demand. He then takes that and plans for that evening. People ring up an order. He builds a pizza. He cooks a pizza fresh, handmade for your order, specifically for you. That number of pizza bases, that number of toppings limits how much he can do. He can only deliver so much in that time. And that's something that you also need to remember when you're thinking about service management. You have a capacity limit. You can take everything on, but if you do not have the capacity to deliver, you'll not be able to do it. So what does he do when he's delivered? He then looks at the value. What has he taken in income? What's it cost? How much has he got left over? What did he run out of? And the important thing is that feedback loop that takes it back to the demand for the next day, the next week, and he works out then, should he have more bases on the Friday or less bases on the Monday? All of those feed into that. And it's that learning curve, which is so important in so many value streams, that value chain of from a demand to a satisfaction and getting that loop back.
That's a good point. I'm ready to visit where you live to try out his pizzas.
They're great.
So, and I think it's just a practical example for us to anchor into of connecting that flow of work and ultimately what's the demand and the value being delivered. ITIL 4 has so much relevance today, and we've seen a significant increase in our conversations as well as I think as some of yours that you were talking about earlier. And it's a strategy. We were talking about high performance. Well, what's a strategy? Well, it references, it gives me guidance. In the rewrite of ITIL 4, it's very refreshing, and they say start where you are, and we'll talk about some of those principles, but it has guiding principles. Culture matters in an organization and things that would guide me in making my decisions, and it wants to offer some of those inspirations that you can bring in and make your own. Governance is an important part of an operating model, but you'll notice right at the heart of this, we're going to focus on this for just a few minutes here to give you inspiration in the way you might connect multiple service teams and the type of work they're delivering. There is a service value chain model that you can use for modeling out the delivery of capability and connecting those teams. It also brings in practices. 32 practices, I believe, is what we're at. But it says you don't have to do all of those. You pick the ones that fit for the team. And I'm seeing this, especially with the adaptability of the way Atlassian approaches the market, we're able to do that. And one of my favorite ones lately that I'm seeing is continual improvement. It's exactly what you were talking about earlier about that learning. It is a practice within the ITIL 4 framework. So let's take a closer look here of that framework and being able to understand that I can look across here for a service team that's maybe on the operations side, that's supporting a business operations and sales. So we're actually talking to a customer about this recently. In fact, let's take a closer look. And as we see here, I'm going to move across here, and I may not touch every point for that team, but I'm able to map out, and that's what this customer did. They did a mapping exercise in Mural, and they started to connect what was the flow of critical work across these teams of I'm engaging, where do we engage, how do we engage, how do we do planning. In some cases, they actually would skip the design and transition because they were going to take something off the shelf and use that was already there available. And other times, they would have to adapt that. And they would ultimately come through the obtain and build to deliver back to their sales organization as they were going to use that. Ultimately, what they wanted to do was whatever that product or service they were delivering, they wanted to measure the value. Were we meeting the expectations there? There was that continual learning that was going on. And inside of each one of these is the ability to look and inspect and say, what are the inputs? Who are the teams involved? What are the factors I have to account for them? And so that's what we see on this next part is we're inspecting inside of there and understanding. And for this customer I was talking to, what it allowed them to identify was two key bottlenecks that were impacting them today. They were working separately and it's just manual process in one, another in a legacy tool. And they were going to unify upwards of about 3 to 4 teams in this critical delivery of work in the organization. One more example I want to share with you from outside of Atlassian. You can read more about this. We've grown, I think when I joined, we were 1,400 employees. We're well over 11,000 today and continue to grow. Before the pandemic, we were smaller, and our internal people team, technology, HR, recruiting, they said, there's no way we can scale fast. And then the pandemic hit. And what we did, the teams internally said, how do we connect these teams in their work? They mapped that out. They brought the right capability and collaboration around these teams. And you'll find in one of the articles published from our office as CIO, sharing these insights, how we've connected not only the teams, but the technology to automate and save time. But there's a true value stream. So one of my new employees started last week. Device showed up to be able to connect to the network. All of his meetings were scheduled, all of his needs were met, and he was up and going in that first week seamlessly. And that is happening over and over again. And the team, not only is it doing that, they're learning as they go, adapting their practices. So that's a good example of an HR team. But let's talk about some others in just a second. But before I do that, I want to talk about 4 key factors. At Atlassian, we're about teams, and we think about a team-centric and around service management. We want to look at 4 areas. First of all, culture matters. Now, we can't come in and change the culture. That happens within. But one thing we want to inspire, and we've created the Atlassian playbook internally for ourselves. We were growing so fast, we said, let's take the plays that help our team, that anchor to our values in Atlassian, and we want to give a team a way to, maybe they're forming for the first time and working together. We want to give them a tool or a method, not only to help in the culturally, the way that they adapt, but also what are the practices that might guide them. So the playbook, as well as frameworks like ITIL 4 or DevOps or just very core key lean principles are applied in the way that they work. From there, we start to ask the question, which products or solutions will fit around that team? And inside of that is really kind of changing a structure, an agility, a team topology that might be different than the way they're currently structured. And then finally, bringing the right integrations where I need data. In the case of the HR one I just shared, that's directly integrated with Workday to where they don't even have to leave Jira Service Management. The data is there as they're working through these tickets. So these 4 key factors are things we're always asking ourselves when I look across that value stream. Who are those teams? How do they work? What matters more to them? And what are the key bottlenecks? Now, We're talking high velocity here, right?
We are.
Let's actually turn to, I've been watching Drive to Survive.
Absolutely.
That's been a great series. Let's talk about a customer that you've worked directly with in Formula One. I love the Formula One races. So.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, you can't get any higher velocity than a Formula One team. So think about it. A Formula One team is actually a collection of teams. There are different departments, there are different groups. So when a part breaks, and let's face it, we all watch the F1, or many people watch the F1, not so much for the racing, but to see what's going to break and what doesn't happen. Yes. But every F1 team has one mission, which is to get their driver in the car, round the track, as quickly and safely as possible. And that's really important, that they are all focused on that single mission. They know exactly what is success. And I would say, for many organisations, define what success looks like for you at the start and engage your stakeholders. So let's look at that, and let's take this example a little bit further. So the high-velocity service management in the pit lane. A part breaks. They take a picture of it. They put it on their phone. They load it into the service management tool. Of course, it's Jira Service Management. When that part breaks, that then triggers, well, where have we got a replacement part? Is it locally? Is it actually at the trackside? Or do we actually need to redesign and build at the factory? And so what we do is we move on to the next slide. And what we have is there's a number of challenges there. You've got technical departments, you've got business departments. Imagine if you've got a part that's being manufactured in the UK, but the race is Germany, Singapore, somewhere across the world. So when a part is manufactured to replace something that's broken in practice, all of a sudden you've got logistics teams, you've got customs teams, you've got people who've got to arrange for the transport of it. You've got to have it picked up, you've got to clear customs. All of that needs to happen. Now, that's not one workflow, that's a whole raft of workflows that are triggered from one part breaking at the racetrack. Imagine that over the race weekend, that happens many times. And so you've got to be thinking about how can you actively engage all of the teams at the right time in the right way to meet that solution. And that's where JSM steps in and helps.
Thank you, Phil. I love that story. I need to know that the way they connect a service team behind the scenes of what's going on, you watch
Absolutely.
So.
I mean, your teams that are involved, the people at the trackside, the people at the factory, the people who are doing the logistics, every single team is involved in that process.
Fantastic, thank you. So let's take a look at inside of Jira Service Management, a closer look. And I'm going to highlight a few features we've talked about today, maybe some others the next level down. The ones that really, I think, we'll get back to a summary and kind of get some thoughts from both of you of what features are really important out of the gate early on to maybe change this, not only way of working, but delivery, better collaboration. And one thing that's super exciting, you've heard about us earlier today, and I've been seeing this for the past year of this unified help as we're starting to deliver on this capability. We said early on with the portal, we've measured the portal delivery. When an email-centric organization was talking to a manufacturer not too long ago, and you're down on the floor, you're working, your email is probably one of the easiest ways to communicate back with IT. What they found over time is around 30% in reduction of some of those emails because of what the portal provides, and they're able to provide some for a walk-up and put a ticket in the portal, they can check on tickets and they're collaborating there. And so that's just one example, but the chat-based help and support that we've had now for a while, and we're super excited to have the virtual agent now being added into that. Because we know, in an organization, you don't have to be able to swivel out where you are. What's the best avenue of helping those team members across the organization? And that's where we're investing around this overall capability on Jira Service Management. As I said, the portal makes it easy for us to really spin up a service team and deliver that level of service out in the organization. But the portal itself is powered by smarts, meaning search. As more and more individuals search in there, it's going to get better in those recommendations because we know very obscure terms sometimes. They might know what it is, and it's connecting it with the right service team. So the Smarts AI ML that we have there today, and we're building upon that, as you saw earlier, is really super powerful there and exciting, and that the platform is just behind being able to deliver that. Now, conversational ticketing was originally as help. We've brought that into the platform and product, and talking to customers about this aspect, whether it's in Slack or Microsoft Teams, being able to stand up a chat channel and say, well, here's where you go for this type of support. The example of that manufacturing team we were talking to, this is the next evolution for them as they're connecting some of their supply teams in that are involved in some of the logistics. So I think this is the next part in that evolution of working with customers. Knowledge management, and I know you had a couple of points here that we were talking about yesterday, I think is really key. Knowledge-centric organizations, it needs to be a part of the service offering they deliver. Most of those that are coming to support some part of the business, let's say it's logistics or finance, they might just have questions that need answers. We have that ability to do a shift left. This HDI has shown in the research that 15% of this are investing, and it's growing, and I think we provide a pathway towards that.
Yeah.
You had a really good point yesterday. I want.
Yeah, I think measuring ticket volume is not the only metric. Ticket volume, yeah, you can have hundreds of tickets if you close them quickly, doesn't matter. But if you do that shift left and you speed up the time that a person takes to get a response and an answer, that is actually telling you more and is much more important than just the sheer volume and the number of tickets. So actually, the time to get resolution, if you like, the time to get an answer is super important. And actually, think about how you can free up your agents, the people who are helping, to actually write better knowledge management articles for the questions that come time and time again. And again, it goes back to that agility. Learn what does work and learn what doesn't, and always improve.
I was talking to a customer in the San Francisco area, and their tier 1 teams have become learning teams. They're now investing. Tier 1 is a job where you might land in to support, and now they're a part of the team. They're like, I'm looking and understanding, like, out of the last 30 days, where should I invest in KB? And I think they even do a kudos amongst their team, so they award, like, you get a kudos for that. And I thought it's incentivizing the knowledge-centric organization. I think it can apply all across an organization.
Yeah, and it goes back to that stakeholder decision at the start. Yeah. What is the metric? What is the success that you're going to judge your implementation by? If you're just doing it on number of tickets that are resolved, you're missing a trick.
Yeah.
If you're doing it on the time that it takes people to get the answer and to carry on with their work, i.e. you're increasing their productivity, that's a better metric.
That's a good point. And the exciting part is we've actually included a capability from Confluence, we call it embedded knowledge, that's right there, native knowledge in the product. So any team that's up and getting it started very quickly, they don't have to have the Confluence license. They get the ability to work on the knowledge articles, the FAQs, the pointers to other information in the organization. You all have that available right there to be able to create your knowledge insights or possibly create a federated knowledge base. And then in many cases, enterprise customers I work with, they also have Confluence in the organization. They're connecting to it. As one customer referenced to it, it is the fabric of our collaboration across the organization. They said, an idea sometimes doesn't exist. He feels like it because if there's a page, I can't read the page. I'm not certain if this idea is really moving forward. And so it's ingrained in their way of collaborating, and I think it's phenomenal. And it's integrated and seamlessly back into the way that the service teams would work. So both great options for one of the teams getting started or already currently using Confluence as a part of that. The other part is the service request catalog. So that service team that is landing in there, and let's say they're connecting 3 components to the delivery of that work. What is their request catalog? One thing coming from a consulting background of years, I love that we empower teams to manage their own request catalog. Instead of always having to pivot back to the central admin, we can now empower them. There's a new service offering they want to add. They can go through that, and there's several ways that we do that. Richard, on some of the projects I know you've talked about, you've worked on with Service Catalog, what are some of the key things in this aspect right here that you've seen?
I think it's driving a sense of empathy for the customer and understanding how the customer wants to consume this.
Yeah.
We see many service desks that are built by the teams, and I'm more efficient if I get the work in the way I want to receive it. But changing that to develop a sense of customer empathy, going, how do they want to understand the services that you offer? And how does that work holistically across the organization? How do they think about what the service is? You may have a different service for an HR team. Oh, that should be in a different project. No, you need to design it with the customer first experience in play.
That's a really good point, because so oftentimes we want to run ahead or technology teams and say, we'll just solve it the way we think and not begin with the end in mind of the customer. And I think that's the most important, is shipping the value. So it's a good point. One thing that we shared today, you've seen a good look at it, the form builder that is in Jira Service Management natively. I've heard from many customers the fact that they can quickly build and adapt their forms. And that is for the request intake. But I'm also meeting teams to think about a request came in from an operations team. They now got to get another team involved, and they have a linked ticket over into that team. there's a checklist from a form there saying, all right, here's the things you have to do. You have to go pull this out of inventory. You have to work on this next item. So that actually drives and helps internal service teams to deliver a level of support. So it's on both sides of this. And the forms we provide is a great starting point, or they can quickly build their own. And so that's what we see for the form builder, whether it's through the portal, better requests, easy to build, and also better experience for the agents. One example of a customer recently, and they're in the insurance industry, they get field agents asking for help, and in certain cases, they might ask for a certain condition. They're going to send back another form. So they're creating this model. Like, they submitted their help to initial request. They've told them a little bit. Now I need to send back some additional forms I need from them. So they've created this model that wasn't previously available in their former tool they were on. So it's exciting to hear and learn about these. The next part that we've talked about is the asset framework on the platform around Jira Service Management and what that means, being able to have this very open and flexible data structure to assets. Many customers have loved this because it's opening up other areas. One customer here in Europe is using it in around ATMs and products there that their support teams are supporting, and these are service teams outside of their IT organization. So this ease of getting to the data that matters most and putting it in the context that I now know what the ticket's about, and I have better context so I can respond to that. And so that's where it comes in, whether it's facilities or moving of pianos. I've seen that in artwork in the Americas. There's a lot of possibilities and use cases, and we always love following that. It's flexible to fit the needs of the data in the team. Those assets are being able to support those requests, and they're surfaced in a way that is in the context. If this is for this facility location and what's going on around that. A major university I was talking to a couple months ago in the eastern side of the US, they now know, because they're using Insight, they know where different types of equipment is deployed around some of their scientific offerings that they have around their classes. And they were just going through the level of that and understanding and moving those devices around. That was a game changer for them, that they were using a spreadsheet previously. So there's just so many use cases out there available to us, meaning that if I look at this example here of this object, of this user, I immediately have rich context for which team they work on, what they're responsible for. But the other part of it that I've appreciated, but I've heard from customers, is what other types of tickets are out there? Immediately, we're able to inform you about that information. And we're just getting started in this area. It's really excited about where we'll be able to build upon this. So let's talk automation for a second. Bill Gates identified it. I think this is a great quote from him, that this is where efficiency comes in an organization. It will magnify that efficiency when we apply it. HDI and their research has come there. But Richard, you and I were talking about automation, where you're seeing this come up and what is being realized, kind of that aha moment sometimes in some cases. Do you care to share a little bit of that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the times there's many manual tasks being done in the service desk, and the agents aren't actually adding any customer value doing this. Yeah. And if they're successful and more tickets coming in, they've got more work, they've got growing teams, then there becomes bigger overheads. So by looking to automate, you're removing what ITSM calls the toil, that manual effort where they're not adding any value, which then frees up the time for these agents to really focus on adding value to customers. They can spend more time understanding the difficult customer problems and less time just flicking switches and pressing buttons.
That's a great point. And I think that's where we've invested around this to bring Jira automation at the platform level. Great no-code base for starting, empowering teams to adapt quickly, fast time to value. And then also do just kind of mention, because the Adaptavist team builds great tools in this area, where Script Runner fits in. And it's amazing where I'm going to be able to go out and connect to an external system and come back in. I've seen that combination of that recipe a lot in some examples. You were sharing one, I think earlier, a couple days ago, we were talking about some of those you're seeing in the field.
Absolutely. I mean, it is really important that you remember that Script Runner is a great tool, automation, but actually one of its real powers and the real strength that it can bring into JSM is the ability to integrate and interact with other APIs and things that people have maybe not even considered in that respect, that there isn't an off-the-shelf integrator, and the fact it can push information out to those other tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And also pull that information back in.
Yeah,
We've got all these other different data sources. And as you said already, Paul, the ability to visualize all of that information and have that rich insight into that empowers the agents to really understand the context that much better.
It's a good example. And the starting point for customers, that no-code ease of building, I think, is the key part of it, and then having the ability to integrate in ways that make sense to save time. Let me look at an example here. So this is an example where we have an employee onboarding going on, and we need to get information about assets that belong to them. So this is an HR to IT example with probably purchasing or finance involved. And so when this automation rule that we had there runs, it's going to take the context when it's submitted. All I have to tell them of who the employee is. Automation goes and looks at the asset data store for this, the schema. It says, okay, for Cassie, what does she own? Well, first of all, we're going to go ahead and link her issue into this. So there's a facilities ticket here about pulling some of the asset information. And we also go like, wow, she's got 4 different devices. And so we were like, okay, maybe she's acquiring too many, or they actually do belong to her and she's doing different jobs in that regard. But the context here is I can drop into this ticket as an agent. Whatever the object is I need, automation can interact with assets, bring that kind of data back. Or as we're talking about the more advanced one, I've got to go out to my ERP system and tell me what's the status on this purchase, or start a whole purchase process. I'd have to previously maybe do a swivel chair. We can start to connect those critical capability of work, and I think that's important. So we've covered just some highlights. There's a lot more that we need to get to. What are some other ones that are just top of mind right now that you're seeing in projects?
Slightly different to what we talked about the other day,
Yeah.
but it came as we were going through today, and it was one of the things yesterday. Reducing context switching.
Yeah.
There's all that research that says you're not fully focused for 20 minutes every time you context switch. So the more things that you can do in one place, and the more things you have help with, and you're not having to swap tools, you're actually just working in one place, the less context switching, the more that empowers your team to deliver at high velocity. Yeah. And I think that's something where always look at what are the things that will help that productivity, that speed. That's the things that JSM, working within that framework and that extendability framework, really gives you an edge over many of the competitors.
That's a good point. That's a good one.
Yeah, I'd say just build on that. I think it's very much the alignment that's enabled by having the centralized platform as a tool.
Yeah.
And the visibility and the transparency that's there. So when you need to bring other teams in, they can also get the context they need, and they can visualize it from the perspective of a customer rather than being sitting in isolation, as you find, on legacy tooling.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you think about that flow of work, something's coming in a demand or service, and reaching across the teams to be able to connect that. And I'm a manager or director, I've got a dashboard I'm looking at because it might be unifying 4 or 5 teams and the flow of work, and where's the bottleneck, where do I need to help them? Maybe there's different factors that are impacting it. And I think that's the key part of it for Jira Service Manager, just that fast time to value. And even initially, it's the adapting. You talked about agility earlier on. The number of organizations that we've talked to that had to pivot overnight and what that meant, and those that are actually using our products, we've heard some really good stories and examples. The other thing I mentioned earlier, back to the study that we touched on earlier, that open and collaborative, meaning take down the silos and open up the collaboration, whether it's simply just a app mentioned in Jira. That happens all the time in my day-to-day work. I was walking in, and someone mentioned an important thing I needed to work on as I go back across the U.S. this weekend. And so I was like, I had forgotten about that. Thank you. And it was just simple app mention, came up in my mobile. I'm seeing it. And I think that level of collaboration, wherever a team is at, being able to bring that in a way of working, I think is really key. And then what Richard said, that visibility work, that's one that helps bring those walls down. So
Absolutely.
I think it's key. So you both have picked a couple of really good examples. I wanted to get into customer stories, so I want to hand off to, I believe Phil's going to talk about a couple here, and then Richard.
So one of the challenges we were set for this was to talk about things that were not IT service management. So where could I go? Well, I'm going to start in the northwest of the UK and a water company. The government has set a rules that deregulation of the water industry is going to happen, which means you can buy your water and have your water supplied by retailers and wholesalers, very similar to what they've done with other utilities. But that actually means that they had to set up a whole means by which those suppliers and retailers could interact. So we went and worked with this utility company, and some of you will know it. I'm not going to name them, so go and work it out. Mosul, the Market Operator Service Limited, they provide the rules, the hub by which all these organisations connect. But what that is it's an asynchronous process, because a retailer will make a request, a wholesaler will deal with it, they'll respond, etc. An example might be just checking that meters are installed. checking that the meters are running correctly. A retailer would want to know how much water is being done, but the wholesaler will be responsible for the support and maintenance. And so what we have is that problem was really interesting, because not only did we have it as the government-appointed MOSL, they didn't actually have determined at the start of the process what was the actual full process. They knew the big ticket items, but they hadn't defined the detail. So it was an agile process right from the outset of, we're introducing deregulation, we're going to work it through, and each bit that we develop will be done in an agile way. Sometimes that meant that actually it felt as though the requirements were changing every night as people came in. It was really agile. The SLA that they had was a different method of SLA. They didn't measure in minutes or hours, they measured in days. So we had to build a new SLA calculation method. SLAs could be extended because certain things happened. Bad weather, inclement weather could extend an SLA. So there were certain rules that had to be built in. But we built off that JSM platform and extended it out. Happy to talk about this. I can go on for hours. So I'm going to stop and just say, yeah, custom SLAs, API integrations, management reports, all big things, but all built off that tool. But again, it was building to a particular process problem and working through that process problem. It wasn't about, let's implement a tool. It was about, let's solve a business problem.
That's a fantastic one. In 20,000 customers getting a service level and a quality there, significant improvement they're able to deliver. It's
even better when you measure it in how much water they supply, but that's another metric altogether.
I'd like to see those metrics. Building society, that's another really good one.
Yeah, so I know there are some people here from this building society, so I'm definitely not going to name them. If they're in the audience, please feel free to shout and cheer. We've literally just launched this week, an amazing knowledge management system. It started from a proof of concept. It really did start from there. It was like, how can we solve this problem? They had an incumbent legacy knowledge-based system. Really, I heard all the challenges. Oh, did I hear the challenges? Working with that team, I had my ear bent. I was told so many times, if your system does not do this, we're going to come and beat you up, etc. They were very, very forceful in their requirements. But what we did was we took Confluence. We used Confluence with Refined and Kamala, and we were able to build both customized workflows and customized looks and feel that matched. Great. So what we've done is we've gone from a POC, we launched the MVP this week. Give you an idea of the scale, I checked the stats just before I came in today. 2 days live, and I've looked at the first 2 days. 6,000 unique users, with an average of 3,500 each day, having their questions answered within 3.75 minutes on average. That is a stat and a metric that has just blown them away. And it was a turn off on Monday, turn on the new system. The even better metric was the number of support requests related to that content. After the first day, when we'd had, as I say, 3,500 folks had been in and looked at it, what had we got? 17 support tickets. And most of those were actually from the team testing to make sure it was actually working.
I love this story. Is a knowledge-centric organization. It's a learning organization.
Yeah.
Shift left to be able to get to that value, and then just the size. I
mean, some of the stats on there.
Yeah.
Just migrating 3,700 articles, which were multi-page articles. They weren't just a few lines of words. They had really clever things. Brilliant thing. If anybody is from that place and you've recognised it, do come and talk to us. We're absolutely chuffed to bits about what this has delivered, and so are they.
Yeah, and I think this is just another good example that we see so many outside of beyond the traditional use case. And we see the connection of IT to so many other service teams, but we're also seeing that at other areas where we can help teams because of the platform approach. So we were talking about food earlier, and delivery of food, I think, is another, really good one for us to anchor on of a story that you've worked closely with as customers. So
perfect. Thank you very much, Phil. So we work with this customer. They're a hyper-growth grocery delivery service. What does this mean? This means if you're in a central city in Western Europe, you can get on your phone, 2 a.m. in the morning, I need milk. They'll have it on your door in 15 minutes, delivered on an electric scooter. Now, they were in a period of hyper-growth because when COVID hit here in the UK and across Europe, you couldn't just go out to the shops anymore. It was more difficult. So this was great for them as a business, but very challenging for them to continue providing a good service to their customers. So we helped them in that they'd started using Jira Service Management, and they weren't getting the customer experience, they weren't getting the customer satisfaction that they thought they needed for it. So that's when we got involved to help them out. So in the initial deployment they did, and this was done by the team that loved and used Jira software, naturally they started to stand up Jira Service Management for this, they didn't have any support for the multiple value streams that were in play, and they had really immature internal processes. This created a disconnect between the different teams that were involved, and they had no vision of customer centricity. Now, the hyper-growth, as we mentioned, was exacerbated by the number of manual tasks they had. All the IT are doing manual tasks, more work, more manual tasks, no time to focus on the customer. They also didn't have any automation in place to help drive this. So with no systems thinking, disjointed collaboration across the different teams, and the growth of silos, they really needed a holistic approach to help realign the services and start developing some customer empathy. So how did we help them? Well, we really started by mapping the value streams that they had to create the customer journeys for them. We introduced customer visible SLAs and a simplified service catalog, which got an immediate response in terms of customer satisfaction. Automation brought in to remove manual effort and to focus on the customer needs, and then configuration management and the IT asset management was deployed. This gave them issue context and auto-routing of approvals. Knowledge management was then brought in to provide self-service and start shifting left to avoid escalations. Yeah. So the feedback we got for this was there was an overall increase in the customer experience. Internal stakeholders liked the unified platform and the work was aligned. And we started with a cultural shift to customer first. This was then continued by bringing in a continually improving practice to keep up the drive.
I was excited to move toward the value.
Yeah,
because I saw when you saw this shared, I was like, this is really good.
So I want to actually show you an example of this in reality. So this is an example of a cross-team value stream. And this is an extract from a process from New Hire. Not the whole process, but just an extract from this. So you can see from this, it starts with a hiring manager, but it goes across all sorts of different teams. It reaches recruitment, HR, procurement, and then both IT field operations and IT security operations. By visualizing this from the perspective of the customer, it allowed the different teams to understand how their interactions contributed towards the overall customer experience rather than being purely isolated.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing those stories. I know we've got a lot more that we've talked about those and probably could take some of them afterwards. I just want to very briefly, we've got a lot of strategies, and I know you've seen this time and time again. Of these, and I'm not going to go through these, what's the top one for both of you if you had to just briefly pick one? What it would be?
I'd start with the first one here. Begin where you are, start where you are. I think that's the most important. A number of customers come to us going like, what we've got is no good. We want to throw it out and start again. And to say, there's learning there. Even if everything's wrong, us understanding what you don't like speeds the process of getting something in that you do like.
It's good.
Yeah, and I think the one I would do is, it's sort of tied into number 8, but it's understanding your stakeholders and what success looks like for them.
Yeah.
Making sure that you know who the stakeholders are and what does success look like. Know what that is, because if you don't know what success looks like for a stakeholder and you deliver something that doesn't address that, they're not going to see it as success. They're just going to see you've done some fancy implementation. So understand from your stakeholders what it is that helps them see success.
Yeah, I love those. Those are fantastic. And then the continuous improvement we've talked about. I think that actually opens up agility in the way that you adapt over time. So if you want ideas, I think there's additional beyond this that we've published in the ESM guide from Atlassian that are looking across a lot of really good examples that different Atlassians have brought within this, as well as some customer examples. Take a look at this guide. It's available out there. So what I want to do in the few minutes we have left here, I'd like to be able to take some Q&A. I believe we've got a microphone. So if you have any specific questions about anything we've covered today, product-wise, strategy-wise, we'll also be available afterwards to visit with you. If you just raise your hand, we can move around with the microphone here in the remaining few minutes we have.
I can't see any hands.
I know.
I can't even see any faces, let alone any hands.
Okay. All right.
Oh dear, have we scared?
I see a hand. There we
I
go.
see one.
One in the middle.
In the middle.
In your experience, how important has the mobile app and being able to access Atlassian products via mobile app been to the solutions you're deploying?
I'll take that initially and I'll hand off to you because you've probably seen it in the field. As I mentioned coming in here, someone mentioning me at an app mention and then the notification came up as something I had forgotten about because I was traveling. And I hear it from customers in our mobile experience. We've invested in a full team around, not a team, I mean, it's a large team that is working on the mobile experience both in the two major platforms. So it's key to our strategy of being able to bring that level of capability that we're mobile, moving around to different types of teams, whether it's service support teams or obviously outside of that into software and business teams. So I know it's been important in our day-to-day lives, but I hear it from customers on a regular basis. There's a strong roadmap for it as well. If you check our open roadmap online, you'll see capability that's been mapped out that we'll be bringing to that. But from the field and deploying, working with customers, what are you seeing?
Again, I think one of the things I saw was the pandemic shakeup of moving people out from the office. That ability to have that, I want to say unified experience, but you've nicked that for another thing. That common experience across all of the different tools that you use, whether it be mobile, desktop, laptop, etc. Having that common experience that you can use wherever, whenever, in whatever way works for you, has had a huge impact to a lot of industries and a lot of organisations. Those that are still rooted in you're sat at a desk with a desktop, less so.
Yeah.
Let's face it, if you're sat at a desk and you're just working on a desktop computer, the fact that you have a mobile ability doesn't really help. But if you're out and about, I have my phone with me all the time. I respond to things when I'm out in the field, when I'm walking my dogs, whatever. Just, it breaks that tying people to a desktop. Yeah. And that has had a huge impact when people have moved and shifted their movement.
Yeah, I'd say that there's definitely a value add for everyone, the ability that you can work anywhere. For some particular teams, it's absolutely essential. Like IT field operations, in my example, they're on the road all the time. Yeah. The ability to get that and get that context directly is absolutely essential for them to work.
One that I've seen just not too long was a manufacturing use case because their teams are down on the floor checking equipment, so they're updating tickets directly from the mobile device versus having to go back to their desktop. So thank you for the question. I think it's a really important aspect of meeting, support agents, support staff, service teams where they are. Other questions? We've got a few more minutes here.
There's another one, I think. Is that a hand? Yes.
Yeah. Yes, there we go. Yeah.
I could see movement.
So regarding mobile app, it's really good, but I have a question. Will there be possibility for customer to raise tickets via mobile app?
Yeah, so good question. I know, talk to product, we do see it from time to time. We have several of our product managers here, including Shihab and them. I know they're down around the product area. It would be a good conversation with them. The one thing I love about our product team, we're always learning the investment that goes there of taking the feedback directly, whether it's coming in through Jack or coming through interactions. So I don't know specifically around that. I know the conversations. I have not seen a roadmap commitment to that, but there is interest in that aspect. So we can follow up with a couple of the product managers. So thank you for asking the question. It's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I want to pick up on there is, don't just think about the mobile app. Yeah. Remember that there is the widgets, the APIs that you can actually embed into your own tools and your own solutions. Yeah. So if you're building the Road Warrior Ultimate Toolkit and you want to tie it into JSM, knock yourself out. You've already got the ability and the functionality to do that today. It's not something that you have to go, they've got to swap out of our Ultimate Rule Toolkit and go into JSM on the mobile app. They can actually do it from within that toolkit by you just using that widget or that API.
You actually remind me of a customer conversation just a couple of weeks ago. They are adding the conversational ticketing, and they were asking about being able to raise that because they had another platform they were on, were coming off of it. And that actually solved that because most of their end users are in chat. That's how they want to interact. To have to download, add another app. So it gave them a pivot point to do a conversational type ticketing and go there. And then I think I'm also thinking of a walk-up kiosk that I've seen in some different cases. So good point you bring up. Thank you for the question, though. I think we have time for maybe one or two more. Any other questions? I was waiting to get, I see a hand right up here toward the front. We'll get a microphone to you, sir, so thank you.
Hi there. Dave Fitzpatrick from JLL. We work in the real estate services business. Interested to your point about culture. How do you go about breaking down the cultural silos between different teams in a big enterprise organization from the experience of working with your clients?
Yeah. I'll
Do you want me
let
to go
please do.
first?
Yeah, please do.
I think the biggest success I ever see is where you demonstrate success. Success breeds more success. If you can work and show success, even in a small way, and understand what that small way is, it will breed, it will go across the company. When people see a different team that is having success, they want more of that. They're sort of like, oh, we're a bit jealous, we'll have a bit of that. And it's certainly that culture of, if you can demonstrate success with a small team and grow that experience, that's where you have the most benefit. If you try and inflict it, yeah, that's probably the right word, inflict it from the top down and try and inflict a culture on people, they will resist. But if they see that it's driving success in another part, that tends to work very well.
I would add to that, I think, Yaron, it's about visualizing what that customer experience is like. A lot of teams are focused on what's my input, what's my output. I'm doing a good job if I'm moving through that quickly. But if you put it in the context of what a customer experience looks like, what is the actual overall value stream, you can start to align people in understanding this is my contribution to that.
Yeah, good point.
And you change the perspective, start to develop some customer empathy, and that's how you create drive for people going, now I want to collaborate. Prior to that, I was just working together, but I wasn't really understanding why.
You ask, I think, a really important question, because at the end of the day, what matters most are the people and the teams that are working there, and we should start with the end in mind of how do we affect that so they are happier, more involved in that. And I'll share an example from Atlassian that really changed the way. I've been here 8 years, and it's said with me, I love being a part of Atlassian. You'll hear some years. The values are lived out. We have 5 key values. Now, culture changes if you go to team. It's how we internalize those values come in, and how we act like be the change you seek. Might have some variations in engineering versus our customer-facing teams, but they are the rally point of this is the North Star that we point to. That's why Mike and Scott put it in place early on in the founding of the company, and they carry forward. We live those out. So I think in an organization, one aspect you could start, I like what Phil said, if you might start in a small area, you would look at what are the guiding principles. ITIL 4 actually has some really good ones in there that line up with that, but what are the guiding principles for this team? And what will happen is the culture will start to develop around the playbook. Has got some really good stuff in there. If it's a team that hasn't worked together before, how do we form as a team? And then what will happen is another thing. Why are they so happy of doing what they're doing? Or why are they delivering in a way? So I think it happens at a organic ground level that sometimes leadership can definitely, they can play a great role in championing it. But I'm a big proponent of what you can do at the ground level of the teams that are on the ground delivering on a day-to-day. And it's those guiding principles that I think are a way to establish, to go back and say, what are our guiding principles? How do we want to operate? And then go from there. So I'm glad you asked that question, because I think that's so key. We are up on time. So thank you, gentlemen. I've really enjoyed this. The conversation continues both right after here as well as down in the booth in the product area. So please come visit with us. We'll all be down there as well. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. And if you want to connect on LinkedIn or whatever, we're all on LinkedIn. Just find us there.
Yeah, please connect with them on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And thank you to the Sound and Enlighten guys for keeping us blinded throughout this and giving you great sound.
Enjoy the rest of the time. Thank you.